Welcome to Beyond the Balance Sheet, the podcast that helps advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families understand the complexities of issues related to our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Our co-hosts, Arden O'Connor and Diana Clark, will interview a series of guests on a range of topics, providing informative content and practical tools for professionals and families to consider. Here are your hosts, Arden and Diana.
Hi, and welcome to an episode of Beyond the Balance Sheet podcast. Today's guest doesn't really need much of an introduction. He is Chris Herren, a former professional basketball player, and even more than his sports history, he is a man in long-term recovery who uses his story to inspire others into recovery and wellness. He helps students look at their substance use, and we are really happy to have him here today. He has also a website called firstdayfilm.com that talks about education and toolkit and lessons for those looking to get more information about substance use disorders and recovery. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm really excited. So you grew up, we can tell by your accent, in Fall River, Massachusetts. Give us a little flavor for what Fall River was like.
You know, I grew up, my dad, both my mom and dad. My dad had graduated the same year as my mom, had my brother at 18 years old, and then had me at 22. So we were a young family. Grew up the first few years of my life in a housing project, and my parents worked really, really hard on themselves professionally to provide a better life for us. And, you know, my dad was a politician in the state of Massachusetts for 18 years. And my mom, you know, she retired from Verizon, but started with a company by the name of New England Telephone. You know, before it was blue collar, you know, it was a thriving industry, mill industry, textile industry at one time, like many, you know, cities along the coast in New England. But it's a blue collar town, and it's rich with tradition and culture, and you know, it definitely, you know, it adds a little spark to your life, and I believe that, you know, what was ingrained in me as a little kid growing up in Fall River was definitely, I was able to transition that into my recovery.
So that's the pieces that are positive about Fall River you got to use. That's great to hear. So let's talk a little bit about substance use. You were using when it was at the height of what I would say the Oxycontin epidemic. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I started when I didn't really know much about it, right? So it was 1999. It was really just starting to hit the headlines. It was called hillbilly heroin back then. It was, you know, basically in the Kentucky, Ohio area, and then kind of skipped up into Maine, and then worked its way down. So, you know, I wasn't familiar with the drug. I had never heard of it. You know, back when I started, the people that you could get it from were people who were dying from cancer or HIV. That was predominantly the people who were being prescribed it back in 1998, 1999 when I started.
So was there a big black market for it in 1998 or 99, or were you getting it predominantly through people who had legitimate prescriptions?
For me, there wasn't a big black market yet. Right. So it was basically predominantly from people who had prescriptions, third party people who knew somebody.
Got it.
And, you know, sadly, I was spending a lot of money. I was spending around $20,000 a month on it. I had no idea how dangerous. I had no idea the effects of it. You know, I'm one of those people who unfortunately like the feeling. You know, you know, my wife, who I've been married to for 23 years, she doesn't like the feeling. I unfortunately did, and it didn't let go of me for many years.
So how old were you when you had your first moment with an opioid and your brain said, wow, I like this?
Eighth grade. Eighth grade. I had arthroscopic surgery on my knee as a kid. I just remember taking it after knee surgery, and just walking around that night like I was, feeling healed. And it was, I think as a parent, if I saw my children walking around that way, I would be very, red flags would fly.
Absolutely. But we didn't know that then. We did not know that the look on somebody's face when a substance actually answers a question way beyond what it was meant to answer, right?
Of course. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very important, right? In your introduction, I've been speaking now for 11 years. And, for years, I just think there was so much overkill on the worst day of drugs rather than the first day. Like as educators, let's show our children, or as parents, what drugs do to you in the end rather than why you're beginning. And the first day is something that's been, unfortunately, overlooked. And hopefully, that's why I did that film on ABC and ESPN the first day, because, I wanted parents to kind of dive in and look where this begins rather than how it's going to end.
So give us a little bit of that. How does it begin? Let's talk about the beginning. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's, I just remember being a young kid. I remember, going out on a Friday night at 14, 15 years old and drinking and hiding beers. And, I just remember at the end of the night, I would always cover up my mistakes. I didn't want to let my mom down. My father's an alcoholic. Our house was often out of balance because of alcoholism. And I didn't want my mom to know that I was drinking my father's beers, and probably her greatest fear in life. But as a young kid, I would look and I would see people, the ones that didn't drink and the ones who didn't engage in drugs. And I was always in awe of them. I couldn't believe that they could do what everybody else did on a Friday night, but without it. And to be quite frank, that stayed with me in my college years. It stayed with me in my professional years. To be a professional athlete and watch some of your teammates go out on a Friday night and drink water and have fun and laugh and be ready to train the next morning. I was in awe of them as well. So, it was an inside job, as we all know, right? And it wasn't until I was 32 years old until I was really willing to kind of open it up and do the inside work.
Was there a moment of clarity at that 32, or was it a gradual building of clarity?
Yeah, I think it was a gradual building of clarity. Like for me, I'm a huge, when I do my speaking events, and I do about 250 a year, the word rock bottom really bothers me. I don't know why we use it. I think it's careless. I think it's callous. I think it's, aggressive. I think it's prevented a lot of people from intervening early. People want to wait until, the arrest happens or the family's gone, or the scholarship is taken and the opportunity is lost. So for me, it was a gradual, I like to say all the things that happened in my life led me to that moment.
And was it a powerful moment, or was it a dawning? Can you tell us?
I mean, listen, my wife was 8 months pregnant when I went to treatment. I just suffered my 4th overdose. And at 45 days sober, I thought I was able to emotionally handle going home and assisting my wife through childbirth. And unfortunately, I didn't. Right. Unfortunately, I relapsed and I wasn't emotionally ready to handle anything. And as I sat in that hospital room and I looked at my family, my young family, a 31-year-old wife who just gave birth to a newborn, our son Drew, and my children, I was absent. right? Like I had to go back to treatment. I wasn't going to be around. And, I talked myself into that self-pity. And I went out and I drank that afternoon and then jumped back into the world of heroin. But fortunately, my wife gave me an ultimatum and I went back to treatment that night. And that's when the process began, right? That's when, I was willing to battle my self-esteem and my self-worth. And rather than following the crowd and trying to fit into the majority, I became one of the guys in the center that was doing the work that nobody else wanted to do.
That's great to know. And there are always those people. There are people anywhere you go that are taking the different road than the one that leads to difficulty.
Sure.
We can find them if we look for them. It's that we don't often look for them in those moments.
I've been blessed with old timers, right? When I first got sober, I had an old timer walk up to me in a meeting and I had my phone in my hand and I was kind of looking at it quietly in the back of the meeting. And an old timer walked up to me and said, how proud would your children be if they knew their daddy was staring at his phone during a meeting that is helping them become a family again. And, as I tell people in my wellness center all the time, when you go to group and you have that opportunity, you take your family with you. You take your family with you and you present and you sit in that room and you work like your children or your parents or your siblings are behind you watching.
I love that. I look at substance use disorders from a family lens anyway, but I don't look at quite it that powerfully. I look at the idea that when families get on board with their own recovery, they can influence the possibilities of somebody else accepting help or even having that moment of, I want to be better for my family. I think when families can start out with that process, the person who's struggling can catch up. So that's where I start. I don't start with let's separate. Let's start with connecting in ways that are healthy.
Well, I think families have been completely underserved when it's come to recovery and the process. I think HIPAA and I think the anonymity that's been around recovery for so long has allowed treatment centers to close the door and say, come back in 30 days. And that's tragic, right? So when I opened my wellness centers, the model was going to change for me. The families come, they're part of it. And, they're part of our addiction. They should be part of our recovery. And, we've opened our campus up to families and, they're a huge part of not only their loved one's life, but other members of the community too, the guests that we have.
Great. I love that. So let's talk about your advocacy work, because I would imagine that your advocacy work fuels your personal recovery and your personal recovery fuels your advocacy work. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I've been speaking for a little over a decade, right? And in this world, if it's, public speaking is a word of mouth business. And, if you don't go in there and you're not passionate about it and you're not connecting with the children or adults in front of you, you're not going to be asked to come back or to get another opportunity. So, to do this work for a decade has been something that's special for me. I have an unbelievable team that just has the same mission as me. And from that, the public speaking turned into, my foundation, which is Herren Project, which has given over $7 million in treatment scholarships over the last 10 years.
Woohoo! I love hearing that. I love hearing that. Yeah. So
we've placed 27 or 2,800 in treatment in the last 10 years, 2,700. So, the work we do is extremely, I'm proud of. So I think my advocacy work, whether it's speaking in front of kids or, I just came out of a group at my wellness center and sat there with 24 guests. It's all fuel for recovery.
It's all fuel. And I love it that you call them guests, because they are guests. They are there voluntarily. They should be treated like honored guests, frankly. And that isn't always the case in our recovery centers. Yeah. What differs when you had been to treatment, you had experienced it from the inside out? What was the thing that when you opened your own program of wellness, what did you want to bring that was potentially different from what you'd experienced?
From what I experienced, I just want to provide what people say and they don't, right? Like it's like the bells and whistles that they all put up on their websites, but when you get there, it's not part of the program. First and foremost, I'm a man in recovery, so there has to be some integrity. And right. I have an unbelievable responsibility when family members pull onto this property and drop their loved ones off. Their moms, their dads, their grandparents. Here now we have two men who are 74 and older. So, talk about a proud moment is to watch a 74-year-old man walk on this property and say, I'm not done. I want to take another swing at recovery is a beautiful thing. But it's yoga 7 days a week. It's meditation 7 days a week. It's guided. We have a personal trainer that works you out 5 days a week. We have a nutritionist on staff. We do an acupuncturist that's here 3 days a week, a massage therapist 3 days a week, and we do some hyperbaric chamber therapy as well. So, I don't really know what everybody else is doing. I'm proud of what we're doing.
Interesting. Yeah. I can see where you're using those tools. I can understand how they would impact stabilization of somebody who was not feeling particularly stable when they walked in your doors, right?
Well, name me a treatment center that, is really tracks sleep and really wants to follow sleep patterns, right? Mm-hmm. Because when are we most, that's kind of like the game planning that I believe in this is, maybe that person did not sleep well. That guest didn't sleep well for the first 4 days. So maybe they're better served to meet with their life coach later in the afternoon than early, and you have a window of opportunity here. And I know you guys are used to high wealth clients, but what we provide, we could be high wealth. What we offer here, we could definitely bump up our price range. But
you don't.
Well, no, I'm just into having people longer, right? Right. The average length of stay here is 90 days. And, I have.
And what would you like to see? What would you like to see? What do you think would really do people well with somebody coming in with an opioid addiction of long standing?
Well, it's just, I think time matters, right? And so the price point for us, we get to have people here for 90 days, and then we transition, and then we transition them to our transition house, which is right down the street. And every person that's come through this program that has transitioned to what we call the Lincoln House, and our guests there, 68% of them are sober today, long term. That's
phenomenal statistics in this field. It is. I do not understand that. So I want to reel you back a little bit. Did your fame or your, celebrity enhance your ability to get substances and not be caught?
I don't think it. No, I was, when I was in college, it was probably. It's tough to say. Boston College, they had a very strict program, right? So they had a 3-strike, you're out approach. Then I transferred to Fresno State, and they had a therapeutic approach. Like, we're going to send you to treatment. We're going to have outpatient. We're going to have therapy. Both served a purpose in my life. But, I don't think that if anything, it just hurt, right? The fact that I was who I was, and I was accomplishing what I was accomplishing at that young age probably made people a little uneasy to approach me. You know, I wasn't as approachable because of my status and who I was at a young age. You know, but then my professional life, I was shooting heroin. You know, I mean, I was at a point where, I took a chance every day at dying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if it had been 10 years later in the fentanyl world, you might have. We don't know, right?
When I overdosed in 2000, when I overdosed in 2004, publicly, I was arrested in a parking lot. In 2004, the headline in the Boston Globe was "What a shame." So I think we've made significant progress. I don't think that would be the headline today. And who knows where I would be, but I'm extremely grateful that I missed that window with fentanyl.
I get that. This work heals, it motivates, it inspires, but it also breaks my heart on a regular basis. What about this work breaks your heart?
I think here we're so connected. We're a very small community, right? I'd never go over the number 24. So, it's very intimate. It's very private. We get to know one another on very real, transparent, raw levels. So, when you see a family show up with children and they're just all in, and as I tell the guests at my center sometimes, your children wouldn't be late to group if they knew it was going to help their dad. They'd show up early, and sometimes families want it more. But to get to know the families and really kind of see that glimmer in their eye, and then when it gets taken away, it's difficult. It's really difficult. And I have a mom that I'm close with. She's an ICU nurse, and she's buried 3 boys. Three of her children. She has no children left. So it's stuff. It's obviously that really hits you.
So to leave this on a less heavy note, what's the one thing you would like to leave our audience with today? What's a message you would like to leave? Yeah.
I think it's so important, right? It's so important to intervene early. It's so important to jump out in front of it. And, when you have that instinct of wanting to help, right? I think so many families hesitate. I think so many families kind of hope and wish it away. Most families, the families that I deal with, when they call, I say, you can't go back, right? Like, you've made the call, your gut, your instinct is telling you, keep going after recovery, chase recovery, do what we can to get them the help that you want so badly for them. So there's so many people out here that suffer longer than is necessary.
I agree. And there's still hope. It's changing.
Yeah, of course. There's tons of hope. Listen, sobriety gives you an edge in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm better at every facet of my life because of my sobriety. And it's given me an edge. And I don't think, unfortunately, because the stigma that's attached to addiction, nobody really wants to say what sobriety does and what recovery does for people. And you sit me down with anyone and I can look them in the eye and I can tell them, I believe I have an edge on them because of my sobriety and what it's given me and continues to give me on a daily basis. So, I was 14 years ago, my family was on food stamps and I was shooting heroin, taking a chance at dying every single day. And, 14 years later, I have a front row seat to watching lives rebuild and children become part of something special. And I'm very fortunate for that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Chris Herren. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
And for our audience, thank you for listening today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like us on your platform of choice.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Balance Sheet, a podcast designed to help advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families solve some of their biggest medical, psychiatric, and emotional challenges. Visit beyondthebalancesheet.com to read more about our guests and resources, and sign up for our newsletter.